Mr. Chair, you are live.
All right, thank you, and welcome to the November meeting of the Maritime Advisory Board of the City of Annapolis. My name is Terry Lomax. I'm the chair, and as I usually do, I go around and introduce everybody who I can see on the screen, and if I miss somebody because you don't show up on my screen, chime in and let me know. But we'll start in the order of my screen. We have Hope Stewart from the City of Annapolis. We have Andy Fagley, board member. We have Harbor Master Beth Bellis. We have board member Duncan Hood. We have our Ward 8 Alderman Arnett. We have Jake Iverson from Watermark. We have Tyler Northfield from the Office of the Harbor Master. We have Frida Wildy, a board member. We have Mike Tomasini, a board member. We have Rick Nelson, a board member. And somewhere in the ether is Kimberly Consoli, our erstwhile reporter. And if I missed somebody that didn't show up on my screen, let me know. All right. Tonight, we're going to go a little bit out of order because we have perhaps four guests that want to speak. I think it is on the topic of the R4624 and the house barges, although the only item before us tonight is R2624 for appointment of the task force. We also have a report, which I'll take second on. It's actually on item 4D on the agenda, the status of O2521, the Small Business Work Group. So with that, Julian, if you'll admit Mr. Bernie, I don't know whether you would do this all at once or just one at a time. But we have Mr. Bernie, Mr. Sweetser, Ms. Alsop, and I believe you said there was one other.
Yeah, the other has not shown up yet. I mean, yeah, I'll just go alphabetical though and start with Mr. Bernie.
All right. That he was the first to request to speak. So let's have Mr. Bernie join us.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Your lips are moving, but they're not in sync, but that's all right.
Well, technology marches on.
You betcha. Welcome.
I appreciate the opportunity to, and I will try to keep this brief, to speak to you all and to sit before the knees of wisdom. I hope there's not too much background noise. We lost all our power here about half an hour ago. About 3,000 people have lost their power, and we have a generator, so that's on. And I hope it isn't too much background noise. Anyways,
we're all good.
I thought it might be helpful to the MAB, and I have some experience having been on the Maritime Industry Advisory Board, which is the county's version of, I guess, what you all are. But I thought it might be helpful to just speak a little bit about what I consider to be a marina's perspective on the houseboat issue. So I'm not here to really talk about that particularly, but rather address 3 points. One is, I think it would be, from a marina's perspective, very problematic for the city of Annapolis to regulate what kind of vessels a marina can accommodate in its slips. If the objective of Annapolis is to perpetuate or support the maritime industry, the types of boats that are accommodated at marinas really needs to be decided by the marina and what's in the best interest of the consumer. And so you can't regulate demand. It doesn't work. And if that's the direction that the city would choose to go to, I think it spells a lot of trouble downstream. Demand is generated because it's demand. It's not generated because a regulatory agency, city, county, or whatever says this is what it ought to be. So that's really my main point. And I'll underscore that with a little anecdote that my dad used to say, who founded Port Annapolis, and we've been in business for over 47 years, have some perspective on this. He hated catamarans. And he said the only thing worse than a catamaran is a motor catamaran. And I say that because, not because whether I agree with him or not, but who would have imagined that catamarans, the type of which you see around now, would be really a mainstay, particularly at larger marinas of the marinas. And so if you start to go down the slippery slope of the city deciding what's in its best interest in terms of the types of boats that marinas should be allowed to put in their slips, the next guy is going to say, well, I don't like these catamarans. They're actually bigger than houseboats. They're higher. They've got two hulls. And I think, sailboats and boats really ought to just have one hull because my dad hated catamarans. So we're going to legislate that. And where do you go from there? Well, I don't like schooners. They have two masts. So it's actually two boats, two sloops. We shouldn't have those either. Or, where does it begin and where does it end? So that's sort of my first point, is to say, that really needs to be determined by the marinas and what's in their best interest, not by a legislative body. The second point is, if you start to go down that, I'm sure you all are aware of the fact that the charter industry is a huge part of the maritime industry. So if you begin to say, well, you need to have a 90-day rental as a minimum, or a 3-day, or a 30-day, or a 2-day, you really begin to threaten the very nature of a huge percentage of what the maritime industry is all about. And I know from my experience of being in business for 50 years, a lot of people will rent a boat to sit on it for 2 days, enjoy it with their family or with their friends, and never take it out. So if you begin to say, well, that's a short-term rental, regardless of the type of boat that it is, you're going to decimate that part of the industry. And that industry, particularly with a place like Port Annapolis or Birch Havens, the larger boat yards, we rent office space to charter companies. Charter companies bring about 25% of the boats that are at a place like Port Annapolis. And if you say, well, you can't charter those boats for less than 90 days, or a boat for less than 90 days, regardless of what type of boat, to get back to my first point, then you're gonna wipe out. We live on the service to these boats. We live on the customers that it brings to the yard, that begin to appreciate what a waterfront lifestyle can be like. You're going to completely undermine that which I think we all agree we want to support. And so, I think with a lot of respects, this whole issue is a solution looking for a problem. And I think there are provisions for houseboats in the code, and everybody's been able to live with that. So I caution you on the first point to be careful that you don't begin to try to legislate demand in terms of the types of boats that would be in slips. Secondarily, second point is, if you begin to fool around with what constitutes a charter, how many days it ought to be, that's even more damaging to the industry. And then the third thing I wanted to mention, with respect to the task force, I think a task force might be a great idea, but the task force ought to be really looking at the strategic importance of the maritime industry to the city of Annapolis. How many marinas are there? How many slips are there? All of the data that you need to make decisions that are in the interest of what we all want to preserve, protect, and enhance. Not to go take some smaller issue and tie it up with resources that could be doing all sorts of other things. And so I forwarded to Duncan and Terry earlier the study that Sage analysts did for the county board advisory board, which I think was a great job. And Enterbon Basu knows what he's doing. A lot of that report about the maritime industry reported that it has a $1.2 billion benefit to Anne Arundel County. And I'm going to guess a not insignificant part of that is because of the city of Annapolis. And so ultimately, if the objective is to support and grow and stabilize the maritime industry, it's not to legislate demand. it seems to me that it's to find ways to support the industry and a couple of ideas. Special tax districts. My guess is that marinas use a significantly less of police and fire services than is typical. And something like that for maritime businesses and marinas and that sort of thing at a special tax district, that would allow those businesses to thrive and flourish. We just went through, this is a great story too. At Port Annapolis, we have black market bakers. Probably a lot of you have been there. We had a 6-month dispute with the city of Annapolis because they said you can't have a bakery in the maritime industrial zone. And we said, it's not a bakery, it's a cafe. They bake their baked goods in Edgewater, where there's a full-blown bakery. But they said, well, no, it's a bakery because it's in the name. You can't have it here. It took 6 months to establish the fact that it isn't actually a bakery, even though it's called Black Market Bakers. And it has solved one of the great problems that we've had at Port Annapolis over 50 years in trying to find the right fit, because folks who go there want to have something nice to eat, and it's worked out really well. But that's just one simple example of the bureaucracy. So if another idea that the task force might want to look into would be, can we streamline the bureaucratic process that's in the way of the maritime industry's growth? Things like that really, I think, time and task force are better spent on than taking one relatively minor issue that could have major impacts, unintended consequences beyond what we could imagine tonight, and mess with that. So, and then my final thought is in the bigger picture, and this came up, I believe, in the MIAB report too, is sea level rise. That's a huge thing to be thinking about and addressing and trying to figure out if we want to have maritime zones and a healthy maritime industry. What's that look like in 20 years? How do we prepare for that? These are the types of questions that I think a task force ought to be looking at before it gets into the minor issues, as I said, that can have significant unintended consequences on an industry that is stable, but faces significant challenges in the future far beyond this particular matter. So that's really what I wanted to say. I really appreciate the opportunity to get this perspective out there. And I know I speak for Scott Tinkler and everybody at Port Annapolis because we've chatted about it in terms of bringing these issues forward. I appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Lex, let me ask you just one question. There's currently as you mentioned, there's currently legislation, and if my recollection serves me, in a marina with more than 50 slips, the allowance is one house barge, houseboat, however you want to call it. Is that a workable level?
You mean the way things are, as I understand it to be today?
Yes.
From Port Annapolis' perspective, I think so. I mean, let me put it this way, Terry. I think if it's going to be considered to change that in a significant way, as I say, I think there are unintended consequences that we can't really understand today. So personally, from my point of view, there is an opportunity there for some experimentation with this that exists. And I would turn my attention to the larger issues that I talked about and avoid what I perceive to be, from a marina standpoint, significant pitfalls that could come along with legislating the types of boats and the times spent on boats, as I said. So I think I answered your question.
You did, and I appreciate, and I'm going to see if there's any other questions. I think Andy might have had one.
Yeah, I've got one too.
Okay, well then let's go ahead, Rick.
Oh, so Lex, I'm curious. I think you're correct in terms of supporting the marinas, and I'm wondering though, not that you propose this, but why it makes sense that a marina has to have 50 slips before it can get one houseboat. I think a lot of the solutions that we come up with in Annapolis are often geared towards some of the larger marinas, which is good to support them. But the small marinas are the ones that probably are in most need of that. And so just the logic of drawing the line, large marina gets to have a houseboat, small marina doesn't.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Rick, and good to see you. That's above my pay grade.
Gotcha.
I don't know how that came to be. I don't know what the magic number of 50 was based on legislatively. I guess you could, crawl back or claw back and see why that mattered. I really have no idea. As I said in the beginning with my first point, I think the market would demand or would dictate the appropriate number of the types of boats that are in marinas. And so if it had been up to me, whenever that was done, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have put a number on it. I think but maybe there was some clear intent or clear reasoning behind that number. I have no idea. I really don't disagree with you, Rick. I don't know.
Andy, did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to say thank you for your
Oh,
contribution.
all right. Yeah, likewise. Thank you, Lex. And we will, you'll probably get more bites at this apple, I'm sure.
Well,
sounds
it's
great.
not, I don't really have a huge dog in this fight, but I am out trying to look out for the interest of, Port Annapolis and marinas in general and the maritime industry as a whole. So
Well,
thank you all very much.
We appreciate that, and thanks for 47 years
visiting.
in Annapolis. You were there when I was just coming here.
Yeah, I think we're one of the few family-owned large marinas that's left. So I hope we can keep it that way.
All right.
Beth has had her hand up for a little bit.
I'm sorry.
Beth has had her hand up for a little bit.
Oh,
Electronically, I think she's got something to say.
okay. Oh, yes. I see. I don't look for it. So does Ross. So let's go with Beth. Go first.
Just a couple of responses to Mr. Bernie. One thing you said is you sent something to Duncan and someone else, but I wasn't sure what you said you sent to someone.
Oh, sure. I sent it to Terry as well because I didn't have everybody's.
And I'll
email
forward.
address. Yeah, the Maritime Industry Advisory Board for Anne Arundel County had that Hamilton Cheney is the chair of. Received a $30,000, I believe it was, don't quote me on that, but it was something like that, grant to do a comprehensive study of the impact of the maritime industry on Anne Arundel County.
Yeah, I would love to see that. And I think that you said that there would be less police and fire at marinas, and I wasn't sure where you got that information.
Well, I know we haven't had a fire. We had a fire truck down there last year. I know that we just put in $100,000 standpipe system on a new dock we put in that literally we were told it would never be used. That gets to my point of regulations and the difficulties that marinas have with that. Beth, I don't really have any specific data, only that the police don't come down that way and they don't patrol. To my knowledge, I've never seen them there unless there was a reason for them to be there, and there typically hasn't been. So I don't have any fact-based data on that.
Yeah, I would just caution you about that, because if you Google house barge and you click on news, you will find fire after decimating fire. So
I'm not here to talk about that, Beth. I'm saying, and I don't know why that falls under your opinion there. You're an enforcement agent. My 2 points were that the business of legislating what types of boats should be in marinas, I think is fraught with peril. And
now I'm just pushing back on the fact that you said there's less police and fire.
Hey,
argument with you, Beth.
let's-
So are there any other questions?
Yeah, this is not a debate panel. There's going to be plenty of time.
No, I'm not trying to debate it. I also saw that you said that we can predict the consequences. We cannot, I think you said we can't predict the consequences, but I actually think we can predict the consequences, because there are many cities that have done this, and we can actually predict the consequences.
All right, and that would be something that would be left to the next time around when whatever legislation happens to come before us. We'll probably have to delve into it a lot deeper at the moment. then that.
Sure, of course. Yeah, and then just the last thing I would say is like, I don't think we want to talk about the types of boats. I don't think the type of boat is important. I think what's important to talk about is the use of the boat. So we want to talk about like short-term rentals. So I think the use of the boat is much more important than the type of the boat.
I think I made it pretty clear that it would be a huge mistake, in my view, for the city to determine what types of boats or what the use of those boats should be. So you threaten an entire industry when you start to legislate the use of boats that are at marinas. It's that simple. And I'm not arguing anything. I'm just stating a matter of fact. I've been in the business for 50 years and seen the evolution of how the industry goes. Been in the charter business, had 40 boats when I was running a charter company. So I know of what I speak. And many of those charter boats today, and back when I was in the business, people don't even take them out. They sit on them because they want to come to a beautiful place, to our beautiful city, and enjoy a sunset, have a pina colada or a Diet Coke or whatever it is, and enjoy being on the waterfront. And so it's not because they're going to necessarily be a sailor that wants to sail to Bermuda or anything like that. And I think that's a substantial part of what draws people to our city for limited periods of time. And then they get to know the city and maybe they end up moving here because they love it. They buy a house, whatever it is. But to limit that in some arbitrary way because of a concern about a hypothetical problem is folly. So
Yeah, for sure. I don't think it should be
No,
limited in an arbitrary way.
I'm not here. I've made my presentation.
We
Thank
have more speakers. Ross, you did have your hand up. Are you still have a question?
No, I wanted to say, I wanted to thank Lex for his thoughts, and I got him down as much as I can. I also would like to get that SAGE report, but I just wanted to remind what we're talking about right now is the resolution to establish the task force that then we'll get into a lot of the thorny issues that Lex is bringing up. And it's going to be a fun time, but right now we just want to get the task force launched so that we can start gathering information, which, by the way, I want to note, and Terry, I did send it to you, the Harbor Master's office has already made a roaring good start in pulling together some of the information that I think we're going to need to give the task force before they address the more philosophical issues.
And I saw, and I was happy to hear Lex say that we need hard data, because I think that's something we do need. And whether it comes from GIS, whether it comes from Hope's office, whether it comes from Beth's office, doesn't make any difference where it comes from, but accurate hard data for that task force, for this board, for the council, is going to be key to a lot of this. So to the extent that Beth, you or Hope, your the Department of Planning and Zoning can expedite and get that data, it's going to be a very key element, I think, to moving forward.
So I just want to say, Ross, thank you for kind of that level setting, because issues of whether one houseboat's allowed, if there's more than 50 slips in a marina, we haven't even gotten to the point of the task force yet, let alone what the specifics of the legislation. Is that correct?
Right.
Yes.
Yes. So that's useful as we hear these points that are being made. Thank you.
All right. Well, once again, Lex, thank you. We seem to not be able to let you go once we get you on TV. But
I will push the X on the top right of my screen, and
you have control.
By the way, I would like to have a pina colada, please.
Yeah,
Can you
I
send
left
it
the
over?
bottle on the back of Terry's desk. I think I'm going to go find one of those now. All right, everybody, have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye.
All right,
Thank you.
Julie, if
Bye-bye.
you'll let in Mr. Sweetser, I guess was the next one that signed up, or Ms. Halsop. It doesn't make any difference which.
Mr. Sweetser's coming forward right now, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Mm, mm, mm.
Dun, 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 dun.
There we go. Good afternoon or good evening, Bill. You're on mute. You need to unmute.
I'm unmuting now.
Ah, there you go. All right.
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine.
Great. Well, many of you I know, but I'm Bill Sweetser. I live at 5 Shipwright Harbor in Annapolis, Ward 1. And I am fully in support of the task force associated with 46-24. I think that conversation that we just had with Mr. Bernie, I think it was very valuable because this task force is going to think of things that we should be thinking of before any decisions are made. And this is, I think, a very impacting decision. Do we want to have a task force that looks into what a houseboat does to a marina? Because they do things to marinas. They're hard to maneuver. They're expensive. They lend themselves in terms of the people who are looking to put task force, to put the houseboats in the marinas that we have. They lend themselves to a transformation in the way the people in those marinas, those with pleasure boats as well as houseboats, they're going to feel different about their neighborhood, about their community, about the maritime industry in general as they get mixed in with, if we do decide to do that, if we get mixed in with houseboats, with pleasure boats. And I think to say any more right now would be presupposing what the task force is going to come down with or up with. So I think modifying the infrastructure in all our marinas and all the waterways to accommodate the unique needs of a houseboat, the things that you can all think of. Do they plug into a regular old marine plug, or are they hardwired? Do they get pumped out, or do they have sewage leaving the boat and going into sewage systems on the ground? There's a wealth of things that we have to look at. It's a many-sided piece of legislation, and it has unknown impacts. Even after the task force does its things, we're going to have unknown impacts. There are going to be a lot of money needing to be spent. Our boating community is going to have to learn how to live with big boats that are hard to move out when storms are approaching. I can go out and tie up my boat when a big wind is coming, a big storm is coming, and I can do that in about 15 or 20 minutes. You can't do that with these big houseboats, 40 feet long, 50 feet long, 30 feet tall. They have huge windage. The forces of the winds on the sides of those houseboats are going to be severe. So I'm not saying I don't like houseboats. I'm saying that to have houseboats, we really need careful evaluation by knowledgeable boaters, people who will be on that committee and look up a lot of things that we don't know right now, look into places that we haven't been to and how they're accommodated there, and on and on. This is complicated legislation, and it's been deemed complicated by the fact that the referrals in the legislation that's floating around now, version 3, I think it is, the referrals require that these matters be brought before this board, the Marine, the MAB, the Environmental Matters Committee, the Rules and City Government Committee. All those things are going to have to be looked at, and all the committees, plus a number that I didn't even mention, have to be taken care of. So we need research, we need data, we need to have the knowledge of unique characteristics of houseboats. They are different, we know that, and we want to see how they will mix with sailboats and powerboats and whatever's there now. We have to get the task force to gather the data, then to predict and identify the challenges and the risks that we're going to face once we figured it all out, and then create the options for solutions. And at least quarterly, we're going to have to look into what has to be done by, say, the Coast Guard. which does have authority over, I've got a little thing here in my hand from the Coast Guard, and it says, any vessel that is a bed and breakfast in which the owner, operator, agent receives compensation, consideration for people to remain overnight on board the vessel as a commercial operation. And it fines failure to comply federal passenger vessel requirements constituting an illegal operation against the owner-operated agent is subject to civil penalties up to $43,000 a day. It's serious business. So I'm saying, please support the task force. It's already pretty much agreed to and unanimous on first reader. And we've been to some hearings that included the people who will be voting on it. And I think it will be a very good start and the only way to go about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Is there any questions that you're?
The only thing that I do ask, when a professionally operated boat takes passengers commercially overnight, I believe the Coast Guard requires a maybe not captain, but someone from the company to be present on board. We need to look into that as well. That would be a real game changer.
Thank you very much, Duncan.
Yeah.
All right, Bill, thank you very much. Julian is going to excuse you, and we will have, I believe, Miss Alsop is next.
Thanks, Bill.
All right, Miss Alsop, how are you today?
Good.
Good.
Thank
You
you
are-
for having me.
You are live.
I appreciate this. There's not a whole lot I can add other than experience. Allsop Marine is in Back Creek, and we experienced having a houseboat next to us. And we found it to be so disturbing, difficult to live with. I did invite our other neighbor to come, who's not on this panel tonight, but Seashell, who is next door to me. And we haven't talked a lot, but boy, were we on the same page when we did. The troubles that we were having. There's no enforcement. You were asking, Duncan, I think, about whether you had to have a captain on the boat. Yes, you do. A lot of my people on my dock are real sailors. They take their boats out. They're active water people, and a lot of them are captains. And we were having to call for the Coast Guard, the harbor master, because there were 22 people on the boat, visitors coming on small craft, hovering around late night, lots of noise, people who don't understand boats, a lot of partying. This is Airbnb party material, guys. And they're not people that have skin in the game, that have their own boats, that know how to handle being on the water. So take safety into consideration. I know that Gary Jobson's big on this. So am I. I've had people fall in the water. You all do know people who have fallen in the water. And if they're intoxicated and other people don't know what to expect or do, you've got some dangerous situations. And the big word that I'm going to say, two big words. One is enforcement. Really difficult to enforce anything around this. Truly difficult. And the other one is resilience. Eastport is a small little hamlet. You're going to introduce all these people that come in that are there to party hard, because they've spent a lot of money, between $500 and $800 to have this boat. So they want to milk it, and they're into having a party. we have to live with that in the town. There's safety issues. Who knows what's coming in? Well, you know, I'm not going to unpack that for you. You can do that in your own imaginations. But we already experienced it. We were very, very unhappy. We managed to get them out of there. They had to be towed out. They're not boats. Let's define boats. We need a real definition of what a boat is. So I'm all for the task force. I'll do whatever I can do to help. I'm just speaking for experience. I'm a small marina in Eastport, in town. We're not in our own big space like Port Annapolis or Jabin. We've got neighbors. We've got people on the street. It's a hamlet. So you have to consider where you put these. And I'm not for constricting what the demand is from the commercial world, but who are we actually, who's profiting from this? That's where my resilience word comes in. So enforcement, resilience. Let's, you know, I have to have my brain organized to be able to think, how do I prioritize really what I'd like to see happen? Let's imagine, let's raise the bar and make high priorities for ourselves. We don't have to compromise, but we do have to prioritize. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Holly.
Welcome.
And I hope, as with the other two speakers, both Bill and Lex, that as we move forward in this, with the assumption that a task force may be in the works, that all three of you, as well as anybody else who has an interest in this issue, will participate with that task force and share those comments, because then eventually it's going to come back through this board. It will come, any legislation would come through this board. Any legislation obviously will go to council and will go to other, probably planning commission and a variety of other council committees. So keep those thoughts in mind and keep repeating those thoughts.
Okay, I do think education would be my third word.
Okay. All right, any questions? All right, Holly, thank you. Oh, wait a minute, Ross has got his hand up.
Well, while Holly's here, but one of the things that Jackie Giles and I were talking about is how this panel, this task force gets populated. And I personally am looking to this body for recommendations. The resolution calls for a broad spectrum of people to be on there. The mayor will select, but will send nominations to him, and the council will approve. But I think it's going to be critical to get really good quality people on this task force. Jackie's view is collecting the data is one thing, but she's really looking for a board that will do research on the issues, really of the kind that Lex was talking about, looking at impacts on the marinas. I'm sure that if Marcellus were here, he would say, well, I'm a small marina, I need the help. We need people that really help the council. I'm really the only voter on the council. So we really need people on the task force and from this body to help us think through getting the right policy. So I think Holly made a couple of good points that sort of dictate what kind of people we need to have help us on that task force.
Sounds like we need someone familiar with Coast Guard regulations for starters.
Probably true.
And there was a person that came to my last town hall who volunteered to be on it. I have her contact information. She apparently spent her whole career dealing with commercial boating. And as somebody that knows the commercial boating rules is somebody that I think could be very helpful, whether they're on the committee or they're testifying to the task force. We really need to know how that works.
All right, Holly, thank you very much.
Thank you.
you can be excused. Julian will take care of that, I think. And then Hope, I understand you have, and Mike also, there's a report, and there are people waiting to join in the report on the item 4D, the status of the small business work group.
There should be at least one person, Julian. I don't know if anybody else has joined. Yeah, I see Seth.
Yeah, so far it's just Seth.
Okay. And we got Seth and we got Mike. So I did email you all yesterday.
Hang on a minute. Do we want to let that person in?
Oh, he's in.
Oh, he's in.
Mm-hmm.
Who, I'm looking on
Seth,
my.
down at the bottom right.
Yeah, Seth, if you want to turn your camera on, yeah.
There we go.
Ah, there we go. Oh, okay, thank you.
And yeah,
Welcome,
Mike
Seth.
also served on the task force, or the work group. So I did email you all the recommendations that came out of it. We had a discussion, and then we were instructed to pick the top 5 recommendations. And really the focus of the discussions was the impact of O2521 on small maritime businesses. And what we really did try to do was have a work group that represented all the variety of industries and the 4 maritime zones, so that it wasn't just focused on one zone. And I can hand it over to Seth and Mike if they want to kind of discuss the outcome of the discussion.
That would be fine. Mike, or who wants to go first? You or Seth?
I'll let Seth go first. He's dialed in on some of the topics that we discussed, and then I'll see if I can't provide some background and some filler.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. So I'm sorry, Hope, does everyone already have that report now that they're able to see it?
I sent it to the entire work group. I have not sent it to Alderman Arnett. I mean, I sent it to the Maritime Advisory Board. Alderman Arnett, I can forward it to you right now if you'd like.
All right, thank you.
I'm not a pro at the Hope. I'm not a pro at the how to get to that actual final report that you sent. Is that something that you're going to display, or I should try and pull it off my own email?
You know what? We were not going to display it. I just figured we can just discuss the
let's discuss it. So
yeah, and yeah, make sure that we hit all 5.
Okay, good. So you'll guide. I'll kick it off and you'll guide me. You'll keep me on the rails. How about that? So what we did as a group, I think, and Hope will agree, is that we looked at things from 30,000 feet, and then we tried scoping them in a bit. And I found that that worked out pretty well. I'll start from where Lex Burney just left off. I listened to him with a close ear, and Lex, one of the things that he highlighted was that the task force, the maritime task force you were talking about right now, should really be looking for hard data. And so I approached this along with the group in that same light, that we were looking for data, and I found a couple of things. One is that this most recent legislation from 2021, which allowed expansion of for commercial activity at WME, WMI, WMM zone properties, it provided for that for non-maritime use under certain conditions. So and it seems as though there were basically 3 levels of those conditions. The first level being called a trigger, and you'll all recall, or you should recall, that those are 20,000 square feet of a working yard, 25,000 square feet of on-land boat storage, seafood processing, or a boat or sailing club. And with that, an individual maritime zone property could expand their use according to the schedule that the city developed. The second piece of this is called a water access incentive, which allows for another sliver of general commercial use if you meet these certain requirements: water taxi landing, public water access, recreational water access, crabbing or fishing facility, which we assume to be for the general public as well. And then the third, or the second water access incentive, third threshold, is the category 2, which would provide for an additional 10%. So if the property can produce 150 on-site parking spaces or a $200,000 payment for street end parks or third community boating facility, that parcel would be allowed to increase the general commercial use of that at their property. So what I did along with the group is I really drilled down on what the impact or what an individual property would have to do literally in order to get these 5 or 10 or so percent increments. And specifically, we looked at smaller properties because they are clearly at a unreasonable balance. And what I mean, what I mean by smaller is actually is by definition not the Jabins and Port Annapolises of our community. These are properties which have 5, 10, 15, 25, 50 boat slips, and perhaps they're parcels that frankly don't even have 20,000 square feet. We just had Holly Alsop on. She has property, as we know, with commercial rentals in a building, and then also she releases slips. She's a great example. I'm not so sure her property is even 20,000 square feet at all, period. So what we looked at is what is really available to the smaller properties. The majority of these are in WME. There's a handful that are not. Pier 4 is an example, which is not in WME. But really, there's 1 or 2 or 3. The balance of them are in the WME zone. So I went and did a full study on that. I shared it with the group multiple times, really drilled down on data and how these various incentives could be actually reached, and found that the cost to do so is way out of control for any WME property. I think literally, maybe it would be achievable for the Mears property, which is Safe Harbor now, but I'm not so sure that would even be applicable. So with that in mind, the raw data, we made some recommendations. The recommendations now that Hope had sent to you. And so Hope, guide me with that then.
Okay, so I'll just go down the list of recommendations. I mean, one thing that we all kind of did agree on is, you know, 2521 is still new, that we can't really feel the impacts, but was concern among the group as a whole. They did agree that they wanted things to be equitable throughout the maritime zones. So they do agree that the maritime zones are important. They're vital to retaining maritime businesses. We need to be sure to protect these zones, but we have to make sure that the zoning rules are fair. So that's where the WME zone did come up, because these property sizes are too small to benefit from these water access incentives. And Seth has shared some examples on ways that they could be changed to be more equitable. Another recommendation that came up is a lot of the focus of the Maritime Task Force was maritime compatible uses, but perhaps we should start considering maritime enhancing uses as well. Something that draws tourists and visitors. I mean, I think you all talked about the bakery. We did agree as well, and this will come up, I'm sure, at some point. We need a better way of collecting the property information. I'm sure Alderman Arnett agrees with that as well. What we've done so far is not working, and I think we might need to go back to the drawing board in order to get this information on what counts as maritime, non-maritime uses, you know, and how we actually get property owners to give us that information. And yeah, the other recommendation is that the Planning Commission was told, or was enabled, to every 4 years review the table of uses that are applicable to the waterfront districts. So every 4 years they should considering updating the table, because businesses do evolve, and what could be a viable or a business at one point, you know, there could be something 4 years or into the future. So we have to be future focused when it comes to the maritime zones as well. Is that kind of a good summary, Mike and Seth?
I think that's
Yeah,
pretty much
yeah, I
still
believe that's
on.
a really good summary. Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
Mike, your turn.
No, that's fine. Pretty much dead on. If we want better reporting, I think maybe we just hand all that reporting duties over to Seth. That might be the way to do it. He collected a lot of information in a really short period of time.
Yeah, he'd love that.
And the summary of it, I think the summary of Seth's work, because unless you guys go back and watch the meetings or get the full presentation that Seth made, is that there were properties that were kind of left out when we did the rezoning in 2021. And there was a lot of struggle. There were a lot of meetings where people were trying to figure out how do we include some of these smaller WME properties, including Peter's former property, uh, to get them some kind of flexibility and to keep them vibrant. And Seth just kind of, my takeaway from Seth's part of it was that some of the incentives might need to be might need to be right sized. It's not necessarily oh, well, this doesn't work for any of the properties in WME, so we have to get rid of this trigger entirely or this incentive entirely. But maybe we find a way to say, what is it that you can do that's going to benefit maritime businesses in the community and the community at large? And how can we right size that so that you can come to some kind of commitment around it? Because
Yeah, I'll just tell you, Mike,
$200,000 for
Mike,
part is not a possibility for
it
for Peter. He's not going to get it, or for what Peter used to have as a building. It didn't make any sense to get 500 square feet of non-maritime office space rental out of his building. So there's got to be some kind of fairness, and Seth did a really good job of illustrating that point.
Mike, let me touch on that further to emphasize, so you don't even necessarily, as you read the report that Hope put together for us, that's a great example. So a $200,000 payment into a fund by frankly, any of the properties in Eastport, that's a huge sum of money, which the property owner, the manager, the stakeholders, the partners all have to justify that somehow, right? Okay, well, frankly, I don't know any property owner that's going to do that. It's just way too much money. So what I did and what we discussed and what we sort of thought through as a group, well, what if we took, instead of a flat fee, we took a percentage of revenue that property can actually potentially afford, okay, and make it a percentage of what is actually generated by that stakeholder, by that property in that zone, okay, and make it reasonable, make it payable to the city over a period of time instead of one lump sum. And in exchange, the property gets to, better itself and better the environment, better the community. And it's a balanced ratio across the entire city and across the entire zone, at least. Okay. That's a great example. And Mike, I think that grabs some ears. And then in addition to that, another quick example is the 150 on-site parking spaces. Guys, we all know that doesn't exist. It simply doesn't exist. And nobody's going to build a parking garage in Eastport or even on the other side of Back Creek. So that's not happening. So instead, what if we did this? What if we take whatever parking area that we do have at these parcels and we instead improve them? Here's a thought. If the property owner agrees to install EV charging, okay, to its own cost, of course, and therefore allows the community to say, hey, now we have actually more access to charging EVs as that sort of unfolds over time, there's a benefit to every resident and every business operator in Eastport. Okay. We're not going to create more parking spaces, but we can improve the use of what we do have. So there's a couple of thoughts.
So I am intrigued with a couple of things. One is I am impressed with your statistics and delving into statistics, and I think I've come up with one of the recommendations for the next task force.
Sure.
But I'm interested in two things. One is, and we all know it on this board, have been frustrated with the record, the ability to obtain accurate data and records. And part of that is, I firmly believe, is a reluctance of businesses who are non-compliant to self-report and then find themselves being punished for reporting. I mean, that's just kind of human nature. Maybe I'm overstating it, but I think there's certainly some of that out there. The second thing, though, is I liked what I heard from Hope about, and I don't remember the exact words you used, but talking about not just maritime businesses, but maritime businesses that enhance the maritime and or the and I think you used the idea of something that brings in tourists or foot traffic or whatever. And then there was another category that sounded as though it was not a maritime business per se, but it supports the maritime industry in some fashion.
Compliments.
Compliments. Thank you. Both of those struck a chord with me because the maritime industry businesses, I'll call them hardcore businesses, do evolve. But on the other hand, there are, I suspect, businesses out there that are integral to supporting the maritime businesses, but that don't necessarily sell a boat or repair a rudder or, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm interested in listening to hearing more, particularly in terms of the table of uses. And the only last thing I'll say is that this particular task force, which was an amendment to the legislation, was geared to the fact that there were certain businesses were being left out, and that was the amendment to the 025 provided for this task force to take a look at those businesses that were felt as though they were left behind without having to wait 4 years for a change for the planning commission to look at the table of uses. It was a one-time, gee, we know we left you behind, but we promised you we'd get back to you. And that's sort of how it came about.
Terry, let me speak to that real quickly. So the data, back to the data real quick that we put together, and I have in spreadsheets, which I'm happy to support to your group, or Hope can certainly file forward to you and your group, really does reflect exactly that. It shows that the 2021 updates, the ones that I just spoke of here a moment ago, took an imbalance and made it even more severe. And again, I think two things. One is, I don't think any property owner at all is looking for a pass or a freebie or a free lunch. I think that every parcel owner, every marina manager, everybody in the community is looking to be treated fairly. Okay. And the second piece of this is that we have an opportunity to update all of these things to make them current. Okay. Right sizing, for example, if we're going to use square footage under roof as a benchmark for certain criteria, well, let's take a look at what's real today. We have the opportunity to use what's real today, to study it, to get raw data, and then make that part of the actual ordinance and legislation. So those two things really go hand in hand, Terry. I think they do.
All right. Questions?
I think Alderman Arnett has had his hand up.
See, those little hands, I must be colorblind, but I don't see those. And Andy has a question after Ross.
Yeah, sorry, Terry,
Okay.
for jumping in.
Well, first of all, Hope, you're exactly right. I am extremely frustrated that we did not get data from 02521. I was not inclined to vote for 02521 because I felt that it was taking away from the very reason that we have maritime zones, which is that it is not a competitive industry. And we set up the zones to make sure that we would continue to have those things that need to be on the water. But I'm going to look to this new task force and some of the information we're developing now. But I would be very interested in seeing your spreadsheets. But I'm going to point out to you, you are people that are representing the maritime industry. Tomorrow I'm having a meeting with people that are representing the restaurant industry. All of these things and all of this is directed to the WME and the WMM, who happen to be in a neighborhood. And so when you say fairness and equity, I'm going to be insisting on fairness and equity to my constituents, the people who live here and who have to deal with the parking and the other issues, the parking that the marinas don't really even have now for their marina business. So I will just put on the table that this is a much bigger issue. And it is really, I don't know whether it's fortunate or unfortunate that we're having houseboats and outdoor dining and small marinas coalescing all at the same time. But it is a tsunami that is going to have some interesting consequences. And it's going to be very hard to thread this needle. I pride myself as an elected official of trying to find the right balance. And it's getting harder and harder because we have more and more competition for finding the balance with all the competing forces. So, you know, I'm looking at some of these recommendations quickly and I see 4,000 square foot restaurant. I don't know how you could get a 4,000 square foot restaurant in most of these marinas, but that'll be interesting to talk about when this gets to the final point, which I guess is going to be a report to the Rules Committee on City Council and may or may not lead to some legislative fixes to 02521. But
go there to the Planning Commission also.
Right. So anyway, any data, Seth, and hope that you can supply us is going to be very much appreciated.
I will forward all of Seth's spreadsheets to you all after this meeting.
Yeah, maybe I need to make them prettier.
Okay, Andy.
Okay, Seth, I will let you fix them up and then you send them to me.
I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there, you know.
Andy Fagley, I think, had his real hand up.
Oh, I'm quite familiar with most of all the small businesses on all the creeks in Annapolis, and most of them are running at capacity, have maritime interests occupying their spaces, which is the whole point of the maritime zoning rules. If you look at a property like Allsops, they don't have parking to have any kind of more business than they can possibly have. The people spill out of that place looking for parking in the neighborhood because it's full and because it's working and it's doing what it does. And I don't know of any waterfront. The landlocked properties are a little bit of a different story, but the waterfront properties that aren't, show me any empty slips in Annapolis. There aren't any. Oh, so I understand what you're doing, and I think you're doing an applaudable job, but you know, lessening the requirements for changing the maritime zoning out from under what it already is, to me, is a slip in the wrong direction. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
So Seth, let me, it sounded as though, and maybe Hope you can chime in. It sounded as though that what you are looking at are either changes in the triggers of some sort and or changes in the table of uses for these either maritime compatible or maritime enhancing groups, rather than outright changing the zoning. Am I reading that? And I've not read the report, but am I reading that correctly?
Yeah. So Terry, yes. Let me clear it all up for you I think quickly. One is we're not asking the city to change any zoning. Not asking the city to rework any type of zone within the zoning. In other words, we have multiple maritime districts: WMM, WMI, WME. We're not, and then to Andrew's concern about size of existing properties, you described Alsop. None of this has anything to do with permits to increase or expand square footage under roof, Andrew. So what I mean by that is today Alsop's building is the size that it is, okay? We're discussing the use of what can be at that property. Alsop's marina has the number of slips that it does. We're not talking about expanding the number of slips. What we're discussing is The city had in place since 1987 certain rules by which the parcel owner could put commercial endeavors at that property, okay? Whether it be for maritime use and in some cases not. Within the maritime districts, or excuse me, within the entire maritime districts, the zones had different rules of how much could be commercially viable beyond the maritime industry. It was imbalanced to begin with, okay? The legislation that came up in 2021 with these new thresholds by which you could expand the use of the property, also could put in a different type of renter in his building, for example. The 2021 ordinance legislation actually diverted it even further against the smaller property, okay? Making it
I
more
understand that.
challenging for the stakeholder.
I understand
Okay.
that. Just when you only have 3 rental properties, what are you going to do? Split it and make it 2/3 maritime and 1/3
Okay, and
not
frankly,
maritime?
you're missing the entire point. If you have those three properties, and the city has reduced your ability by way of who you can rent them to, 3 becomes 2 very quickly. 2
No,
becomes 1 very quickly.
no, it's
Okay?
not that. You still have 3 office spaces in a building, and they're all 3 zone maritime, and
Yeah.
they would all be rented to maritime businesses. That was the whole point of it.
And if the pool of maritime businesses shrinks,
And have we
and you
seen that
still
happen?
have, Andrew, frankly, I know, I've been living it for 30 years, okay? So if the pool of maritime tenants shrinks and the immediate neighbor, WMM or WMI, has a distinct advantage by the tenancy that he can put into that property, the WME is at an even greater disadvantage. Now, I'm hoping you don't want that to be the case. The platform across the city is what we're looking for fairness, right? However, what this legislation did is exactly that. It creates an even bigger imbalance to Alsup of who he can put into that space. Okay. So what again, and I'm not going to speak for Alsup. However, I am going to say that nobody's looking for an advantage that's not, excuse me, nobody's looking for a freebie here. Okay. What we are looking for is a balance of what's realistic to that property. It's no Port Annapolis and Jabins, okay, are gigantic, right? But they have guidelines that allow them to gather even more non-commercial use than somebody like Alsa. Now, on a percentage and raw scored both, Alsop loses big time. So what we're looking for is a balance to that. It doesn't have to be perfect per se, but it's got to certainly come into some sort of balance.
So
I understand what you're trying to do.
if I were to extrapolate what you're saying into math, if you have 100 maritime uses that want to come, if you have a requirement to have maritime, and the Javens or the Port Annapolises or the ones that can have 10% non-maritime, the assumption is that the higher rent paid by the non-maritime will help be like a mall, an anchor in a mall, help anchor the rents so that you can afford to rent to the lower paying maritime businesses at a lower rent, and therefore you are at an advantage in soliciting their rental.
That from a 30,000 feet, Terry, that is certainly an argument. My study, we didn't even discuss rental. You don't really have to even go that far, how much you rent a square foot for. Because again, by and large, the smaller the space, the greater the per square foot that you're going to charge for a tenancy, right? Generally speaking. All right. But again, you still have to get the tenant. And if you restrict your pool of possible tenancy and continue to restrict it, you very quickly run into problems. Okay. And, that's just the reality to it.
And I don't want to put words in the work group's mouth, but I do know that really the focus was on, this ordinance and the water access incentives that were created by the task force. So,
Yeah.
so when we talk about the triggers, it's the incentive triggers that allow these properties to benefit from the water access incentives that was established.
All right, I don't think any of us had an opportunity to read it, but it certainly is a lot of food for thought, and it'll certainly will help guide the planning commission as well as the council and this board going forward, because it sounds like the timing is going to dovetail about the time the 4 years is up anyway for the planning commission, which is actually probably good.
Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's not. Who knows? Right.
Yeah. All right. Hope anything else, Mike? Anything else on the business task force?
No, our next stop will be to hand it on to rules, but we can take a look at the recommendations and see what we might need to enhance or add before sending it on to the rules committee.
Okay.
Thank you all for hearing me out. I do appreciate it.
Well, and thank you for joining us. It was nice to hear the analysis.
Beth, great job. Thank you.
Well, can you send me a version that I can copy? I don't know how to copy what you sent me.
Oh, like a Word document or?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll send that.
And then that supplementary information Seth was talking about is really what I'm going to want to dig into. So
yeah, Hope, if I'll interject, Ross, for your benefit and everyone's really, Hope, give me a couple of days on that if it's okay. I'm actually traveling quite a bit the next 3 days, so but I will do my spreadsheet and all that. Let me clean that up a little bit so it's not so raw.
Okay.
How's that?
Okay. So you have a big fan in me on your recommendation number 4. Figure out a better
what number is that?
Figure out a better way to collect the data.
Oh, I think we need to talk about that. Yeah, we definitely, I will be okay with just going back to the, back to, starting the whole thing over again and finding a better way of doing this. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Seth and Julian. We can, you can excuse Seth, and we can then turn back to our regular order.
Thank you all again. Have a great evening.
Thank you. All right. Well, that was certainly a lot to digest, to say the least. Let's start with everybody got a copy of the minutes from the October meeting. I'll entertain a motion to adopt. That's Duncan. Second. Thank you, Mike. And all in favor? Everybody, it's unanimous. Kimberly. Anything on item 4 that you can update us on? We've already talked about 4D. I'll come back to 4C in a minute. There was no October meeting of the MAIB, and Alan is off the hook for November because he canceled that meeting. How about, is any economic development update? We certainly have talked about a lot of it already.
Okay, well, besides the fact that Stephen Rice has moved on to bigger and better. So yeah, it's great for us. It is great that the city of Annapolis has a very strong advocate in the Department of Commerce. So we're excited for him about that. He did leave me with the maritime reporting forms, and it's not, we still don't have a lot more information than we did before. So again, we have what we have, but I am happy to take a new look at this. So Alderman Arnett, we can talk sometime, or whoever wants to be part of this discussion. Yeah, we're going to have to talk about how the best way to go about this. So
Hope, do you have the information that Beth's team developed on all the marinas? And Beth, I've already found some corrections that we need to make, but that's the kind of data that I was looking for coming from 02521. It really starts to tell you what the makeup of the marinas are, the number of slips, what they're charging, and so forth. then we also need to get from 02521 the split of the maritime, non-maritime by marina, most of which I think are the small marinas are all maritime. But anyway, yeah, we definitely need to sit down. I was actually talking with Chris Jakubiak about this a couple days ago. So I'm definitely up for sitting down and talking about the state of collection.
Yeah, especially if now we're focusing on marinas instead of just properties in general in these zones. So yeah, let's discuss.
I can share with Hope.
That would be great, Beth. Yeah.
All right.
And if we can keep this as focused as we can, that makes it even more effective.
All right. I think everybody got a copy of Beth's report. She sent it around this morning, I believe, and I didn't see anything. I'm going to turning to it here in a minute. I didn't see anything that jumped out except the what was the 6th Street, for those of us that are in Eastport, it looks like, Beth, am I correct that the 6th Street end project on Back Creek was approved by the Port Wardens in October?
Yes, I see that. Yes.
Okay. And the other one that the other question here it is. You had the information on the charter doc for 2024 and then so far for 2025. How did 2024 compare to 2023?
It was only marginally less, but I think that's because we told people we weren't sure we were going to be open because we thought after boat show we were going to be closed. So it was marginally less, but not like less than 5% different.
Okay.
And then in 2025, we're up.
Even though we're the closing has slipped into 2025.
Yeah. So I think we need to advertise our charter doc better than we do. But I think we're doing fine.
All right. Scott, I assume you don't have any update on our local maritime recognition program.
No, nothing new. I think we're still waiting for the outcome on the city dock property there, and also finding what I call an owner for operating the recognition program. And the museum, they didn't want to get involved originally, but I'm going to maybe talk to them again. They'd be a natural.
That's the natural home.
Exactly.
And since they're not paying a lot of rent for the building, they can probably help out. But that's just my thought.
Yeah. So may have another discussion with them.
Let's take up R2624, which is the task force. We've heard and everybody I think has read the task force. One thing that came out of the discussion to me was that the amendment let me back up. I sent everybody a copy of the proposed legislation and the amendment that was proposed to reduce the time for the study from 12 months to 6 months. What I heard coming out of Lex, Holly, and Bill Sweetser is that this ain't going to get done in 6 months. And so I'm inclined to recommend rejecting the 6-month amendment, but adopting the task force with a reporting period of 1 year. And that's just my own personal take of what came out of the conversations we heard tonight. But with that, I will leave it to someone to move to adopt our 4624. Somebody had, Duncan, is there a second?
Second.
Micah seconded. Is there any discussion? Well, let's take it in this order. We'll first discuss the amendment. Is there any discussion besides what I just said about the amendment?
So Terry, part of me wonders what will be different with a 12-month analysis versus a 6-month analysis. And maybe it's just me, but it seems like a fairly simple thing. You dig up some information. Is the problem getting this information from the property owners? Is that the problem we're really talking about?
That's number one, that I suspect would be one of the issues.
Yeah.
But more importantly, I think what we heard to me at least, what I heard from Lex and Bill Sweetser, this is almost like playing whack-a-mole. You think you've solved one issue and another one pops its head up. I had not focused on the fact that if you charter a boat and you have more than 6 people on the boat, you now become a 6-pack. You need somebody on board with a 6-pack license, even if you don't get underway. That never was on my radar until that was just pointed out.
Well, I think that's a very reasonable explanation of why we would need 12 months.
Yeah, I just think the whack-a-mole factor is going to keep issues coming up. Yes, Rita.
Terry, I support your idea about expanding it to 12 months because I think there's a lot of research that needs to be done. I'd like to know what other cities have done with this issue and their experiences. And, you know, getting anything done in 6 months is just going to be impossible. So I support your idea about 12 months.
We're actually, it's 5 months because now we're going to have Christmas and Thanksgiving shoved in between in the 6 months. So it's going to be.
Isn't that the way it works?
All right, any other discussion on that? So I guess I'll back up. We'll table the motion on to adopt R46.
Hold on, Terry. Ross had his hand up there.
Oh, Ross.
And
No,
I'm just going to
no, I was
echo. Go ahead,
I was
Ross.
going to
Give me a second. I'm just going to echo real quick how long it took for the Maritime Task Force to really get, you know, going on some things. Especially when you rely largely on volunteers, it's difficult to get it and then have the report done and then have everything submitted where it's supposed to be proper and vetted.
I remember that process.
In a 6-month time frame.
It was glacial. Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't take 12 months, but certainly forcing it to happen in a 6-month window is tricky.
Ross?
So picking up on what Frida was saying, I just recently learned that the District of Columbia actually does have houseboats, and they might actually have good rules legislating houseboats that addresses some of the fears that I can tell you my constituents are feeling. And that's in keeping with what Jackie Giles said, that she really does want this to be a research group that will provide looking around the country to see where it's worked and where it hasn't worked. That doesn't happen overnight. And guess what? The people staffing this are the harbor master and the planning and zoning department. Guess which 2 groups are the shortest of staff in the entire city? So I think, first of all, we can see where they are in 6 months. It doesn't mean that they might not have a lot of productive things. We've asked for them to give us an interim report every 3 months, and some of that could be useful information. We're dealing with the specter right now. Gavin hasn't introduced the legislation. So we're not even really sure what we're researching at this point. I think we just know from what we saw with his initial start that we're going to have to do a lot of data collection and research and figuring out who's going to be helped and who's going to be hurt by all this.
Is there a motion to recommend against the amendment to reduce the time from 12 months to 6 months for the report.
So moved.
And is there a second? Mr. Hood is seconded. Mr. Thomasini moved. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion to recommend against the amendment to reduce it from 12 months to 6 months? Kimberly, that was unanimous. All right, now we turn to the motion to recommend approval of the Arch 4624. We already have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, it's time for a vote. All in favor? I think that was everybody. Kimberly? No opposed? All right, that I will write up the legislative referral report and send that over to the Office of Law. Which brings us to the lighter part of the meeting, which is where are we going to have a December meeting? We have typically either gone to, and he's not here tonight. I don't think, did we go to, where did we go last year? Did we go to Crab?
We
Yes.
might have.
Yeah, it was at Crab last year.
It was, and I think Rick Nelson had proffered that we maybe go to Annapolis Sailing School, since some of us have not been, some of us have been there, some of us may not have been there, and it's always nice to see different parts of the maritime industry. So I will, unless there's a different offer, I always know I can fall back on Duncan if necessary, but I'll reach out to Rick and see if we don't maybe go to Annapolis Sailing School.
He's got a nice space. I think that's a good choice.
Yeah, I think it'll work out fine. The other thing is our meeting would typically fall on the 21st, if recollection, or something like that. The 20.
20. Boy.
It was
17. It looks like.
That was the date I had. I thought maybe that was a date that we had to move it to, but maybe that is the 3rd. Is that the 3rd?
Yeah, third Thursday.
Okay, well then we don't have to change the date. It would be on the 17th of December, which would be the regular date. It would be at hopefully at Rick's location. And with that, is there anything else anybody wants or needs to bring up?
One thing.
Yes, sir.
I want to compliment Beth Bellis on the format she uses for her reporting. My God, it's clear. Thank you so much, Beth. And man, do I feel your pain about the new office space for you guys.
Oh, goodness. Thank you so much.
I mean, goodness gracious me.
We're concerned, but yeah, thank you.
You should be concerned.
Yes, Andy.
Beth, just one other detail about your report. It seems that the Compromise Street potential dinghy dock is not going to happen, or is it at the foot of the bridge?
Oh yeah. So
the St. Mary's.
we call that DOG, Duke Voucher. I think no. I mean, if the city can't get a lease,
right,
then we can't get grant funding. So the city would have to come to the table with a lot of money.
Right.
So
Okay.
it could happen. It could happen. There are traffic problems.
Oh, the traffic problems. I can see easily if we had a place there, people are going to have to park in the church and the high school parking lot.
Yeah, there are a lot of problems with that project. I mean, it's a great idea, but there are a lot of problems with that project.
I think they used to say that dog won't hunt.
You're not wrong, Duncan.
That'd be like Duke of Gloucester won't hunt, DOG.
You're not wrong, Duncan.
All right.
Hold on, Terry. I just have a question for Duncan before we get off. Duncan, I think you and I have an upcoming date together. Can you remind me of that after we get off the phone?
Are you coming for an interview?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, because you know what? I missed that. Yes, I'd be more than happy to. Thank you very much, Mike.
Yeah, after we get off, remind me of the date and time, because I thought I put it in my calendar and I don't see.
It's certainly this Saturday, but I'll give you the
I
time.
I thought so too, but
Yeah.
the time would be great. Thank you.
Can do, Mike. Thank you for that.
All right, anybody else? All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
You got it, baby.
Mr. Fagley, he was quicker than you, Duncan, and you're
Damn
pretty
it.
quick. Mr. Hood has seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Everybody have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll see you in December. Julian, thanks so much for herding the cats in and out of the meeting. That went very well and very smooth.